Looking back, I should have noticed the signs earlier. My wife, Lisa, had always been a restless soul. She couldn't stay still, constantly needing something to keep her busy, a new hobby, a project, anything to fill her time. Her energy was contagious. She worked in sales, which suited her perfectly, as her job kept her on the move, meeting new clients, traveling to different cities, selling products with her natural charm. We've been married for 8 years, and I thought things were going well. Sure, like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but nothing major. She was still the woman I had fallen in love with, beautiful, driven, and always full of life. We had a good home, decent jobs, and a stable routine. Or so I thought. One evening, Lisa came home looking unusually excited. I was sitting on the couch, going through the usual scroll on my phone, when she bounced in, her eyes lighting up like they did when she was onto something new. "I'm signing up for a fitness," she announced, standing in front of me with her hands on her hips. "Fitness, huh?" I replied, only half paying attention. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a while. You know, I've been sitting too much, traveling for work. I need to get in shape, and it'll be fun. Something new for me." She sounded so enthusiastic, and honestly, I couldn't see any reason to say no. It seemed harmless. In fact, I was glad she was taking time for herself. "Sure, sounds good," I said with a smile, thinking that this would be like her previous hobbies: yoga, painting, even a short-lived interest in pottery. She'd get into it for a few weeks, then move on to the next thing. Little did I know that this was going to be different. A few weeks passed, and at first, everything seemed normal. Lisa was excited about her classes. She'd come home and tell me all about the workouts, the new exercises she was learning, and how much better she was starting to feel. It all seemed so positive. I even went with her to the gym a couple of times, but fitness wasn't really my thing. However, after a while, something began to shift. I started noticing subtle changes. She was spending more time at the gym, going to extra sessions she hadn't initially planned. "I'm working on me," she'd say casually. "Chris says it'll really improve my general well-being." Chris. That was the first time I heard his name. Her new fitness trainer. She talked about him like he was some kind of fitness guru, always praising his techniques, how much he pushed her, how amazing the workouts were. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, she was excited about the fitness thing, and I figured Chris was just doing his job. But as the weeks went by, her enthusiasm for the fitness classes grew, and so did her mentions of Chris. Suddenly, she was staying late at the gym for private training sessions. "We're just working on some specific goals," she said when I asked about the extra time. "He's helping me with one-on-one training to get better results." "It's no big deal." I nodded, trying not to sound concerned. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but something didn't feel right. It was the way she said his name, almost like there was more admiration than necessary. Chris this, Chris that. How great he was, how much he helped her. I brushed off the nagging feeling, telling myself it was all in my head. Lisa had always been friendly and open with people. That was just her personality, right? Then, one evening, I noticed her texting late at night, something she rarely did. She seemed nervous when I walked into the room, quickly putting her phone away. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Oh, just Hannah," she replied quickly, mentioning one of her friends from the fitness class. Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. But I didn't press her. The next day, Lisa came home with that same excitement in her eyes. "Chris said I'm making great progress. He wants me to come in for more private sessions, to really push things to the next level," she said, almost glowing. Something was off. I could feel it, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I tried to shake off the growing suspicion. Lisa had always been restless, always looking for the next big thing to throw herself into. Maybe this was just another phase. Maybe she was genuinely focused on her fitness, and her excitement for this new trainer was just that excitement. But it didn't sit right. The next few weeks passed with Lisa spending more and more time at the gym, her sessions with Chris becoming more frequent. I started noticing her texting more often, and there were days when she came home late, claiming the sessions ran longer than expected. She always had an explanation, and I always pretended to believe it. But the uneasy feeling in my gut told me there was more going on. I decided to keep an eye on things. Not in a controlling way, but just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. After all, I trusted Lisa. We had a strong marriage, or so I thought. But the way she talked about Chris, the way she was glued to her phone, the extra time at the gym, it all started to build up in the back of my mind, gnawing away at me. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks in our seemingly perfect life were starting to show, and soon, everything would unravel. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling for as long as I could, but the more time passed, the harder it became to shake. Lisa had never been the type to hide things from me, but lately, there was an air of secrecy about her. It wasn't just the increased time at the gym. It was the little things that began to pile up, making me question everything. For starters, there were the unexplained absences. Lisa had always been good at balancing work, home, and her activities, but now, she was either late from the gym or running errands that seemed to stretch longer than usual. One night, she claimed she had a late training session with Chris. She came home exhausted, talking about how intense the workout had been. But something about her demeanor felt different. She wasn't just tired. She was distant, almost like she was avoiding eye contact with me. Then there was the phone. Lisa had never been one to be glued to her phone, but lately, she was on it all the time. It was subtle at first, quick glances at her screen, a smile here and there as she typed away. But then, it became more noticeable. She'd keep her phone face down on the table, and she'd excuse herself to another room whenever she had a text or call. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it without thinking, and there it was, Chris's name flashing on the screen. The message preview read, "Can't wait for our next session." That stupid winking emoji. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, the casual flirtation glaring back at me like a neon sign. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was nothing, just a harmless message between trainer and client. But the emoji said otherwise. I didn't confront her about it right then. I needed more than just a suspicious text message. My head was swimming with questions. Was there something going on between them? Was this more than just a professional relationship? And if it was, how far had it gone? A few days later, I got an unexpected call from Lisa's friend Hannah. She sounded hesitant, like she didn't want to be the one delivering bad news. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I think you should know, she began, her voice trailing off before she picked up again. There's been some talk at the gym about Lisa and Chris. I stayed silent, bracing myself. Look, I'm not trying to stir things up, but some people have noticed how close they've gotten. A few of us even saw Chris making comments, flirtatious ones, in front of everyone. He told Lisa something like, "Your muscles look incredible when you squat." And it wasn't in a way that felt professional, you know? I clenched my jaw. And Lisa? Hannah hesitated. She just laughed it off. But it's not just that. They've been doing private sessions a lot more frequently, and some of the girls, well, they're starting to talk. Talk about what? I asked, already knowing the answer. About whether there's something going on between them. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. Other people were noticing it too. After hanging up with Hannah, I sat on the couch, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe it, but everything was starting to line up. Lisa's late nights, the extra sessions with Chris, the secretive phone behavior, it all pointed to something deeper, something I hadn't been ready to face. I couldn't stop thinking about that stupid text from Chris. Can't wait for our next session. Was that all it was, a harmless flirtation? Or was there something more behind his words? The next time Lisa mentioned going to the gym for a late session, I decided to test the waters. You've been spending a lot of time with Chris lately, I said casually, watching her reaction carefully. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Yeah, he's helping me push harder. I've made a lot of progress. I nodded slowly. It seems like he's more than just a trainer. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. What do you mean? I've heard things, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Hannah mentioned that he's been a bit flirty with you. Lisa's face flushed slightly, but she shrugged it off. Oh, come on. It's harmless. He jokes around with all his clients. It's nothing. But her response didn't sit well with me. If it was nothing, then why did she seem so defensive? And why hadn't she told me about it herself? A few days later, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called my friend Tom, who worked security at the gym. I knew I needed more than just gut feelings and rumors. If there was something going on, I needed proof. Tom agreed to keep an eye on things for me. "I'll send you anything suspicious," he promised. And a week later, he did. The first video he sent was of one of their private sessions. It started out normal enough, Chris showing Lisa some new exercises, guiding her through the moves. But then, halfway through, things got weird. He was standing behind her, adjusting her form, his hands on her waist for far too long. At one point, he leaned in close, whispering something into her ear. Lisa smiled, her cheeks turning red, and then they both laughed. I watched the video over and over, each time feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was my wife falling for this guy's cheesy charm? The final blow came when Tom sent me another video. This time, it wasn't just a training session. It was after hours, when the gym was almost empty. Chris and Lisa were standing by her car, laughing about something. He leaned in close, his hand brushing against hers, and she didn't pull away. I couldn't deny it any longer. The red flags had turned into neon signs, flashing brightly in front of me. Lisa was involved with Chris, whether she wanted to admit it or not. And now, I had to figure out what to do next. After seeing the video of Lisa and Chris in the parking lot, I couldn't sit back and pretend everything was fine. The evidence was right in front of me, and I needed to know the truth. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, but my mind was miles away. Lisa breezed past me on her way out the door, heading to another training session with Chris. I watched her leave, my heart heavy with suspicion. I had to find out more, but I couldn't confront her without solid proof. She'd just deny it or twist the situation, telling me it was all in my head. I needed to dig deeper, to gather more evidence before making any accusations. That's when I decided to step up my investigation. The first thing I did was install a tracking app on her phone. It wasn't something I was proud of, but at this point, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I needed to know where she was really going and whether she was meeting up with Chris outside of the gym. I had to be careful Lisa wasn't stupid, and if she noticed anything out of the ordinary, she'd get suspicious. The app synced with my phone, showing me her location in real time. At first, nothing seemed off. She went to work, to the gym, ran errands, everything looked normal. But then, on one particular night, the app showed her at a location that wasn't the gym. She was at a small cafe, just a few miles away, and she stayed there for nearly 2 hours. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to drive by. I didn't plan on confronting her, not yet, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. As I approached the cafe, my heart raced. I parked a few cars down and spotted her through the window. There she was, sitting at a table with Chris. They were laughing, leaning in close as if they were sharing some private joke. It was one thing to suspect an affair, but seeing it unfold in front of me was something else entirely. I clenched the steering wheel, fighting the urge to storm in there and make a scene. But I knew I had to play this smart. If I acted out of anger, I'd lose the upper hand. So, I drove away, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. That night, I barely spoke to Lisa. She didn't seem to notice, too caught up in her usual post-gym routine. As she showered, I scrolled through her phone, checking the messages between her and Chris. Most of them were vague, about training and workouts, but there were a few that stood out. One message from Chris read, "I had a great time today. Let's do it again soon." Lisa had replied with a simple smiley face, but the tone of their conversation was unmistakable. It wasn't professional, it was personal. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I checked her phone when she wasn't around. I kept tabs on her location, and I even asked Tom to keep sending me videos from the gym. The more I watched, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just harmless flirting. Lisa was being pulled in by Chris, and he was enjoying every second of it. In one video Tom sent, Chris was practically hovering over Lisa as she did some stretches. His hands brushed her waist, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made my skin crawl. And Lisa wasn't pushing him away. In fact, she seemed to be encouraging it, laughing at his jokes, smiling at his compliments. I confronted Tom about it one night, asking him if he thought there was something more going on. "Look," he said, shaking his head, "I've seen this kind of thing before. Trainers like Chris, they know how to play the game. They flirt with their clients, make them feel special. But it's not always innocent. Do you think he's? I trailed off, not even sure how to finish the sentence. Tom looked uncomfortable. I don't know, man. But if I were you, I'd be careful. It's one thing to catch them flirting, but if this is going further than that, you need to be ready for what you'll find. I nodded, realizing that Tom was right. I needed to brace myself for the truth, whatever that might be. Over the next week, I watched Lisa even more closely. Every smile, every laugh, every time she mentioned Chris, it all seemed like confirmation that something was happening between them. But I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away. That's when I remembered the gym security cameras. Tom had access to them and had already sent me some clips, but I needed more, something that would show Lisa and Chris in a situation that left no room for doubt. I asked Tom if he could get me footage from the gym after hours, when Lisa and Chris would sometimes stay late for their private sessions. A few days later, Tom came through. He handed me a USB drive, telling me, "You're not gonna like what you see." That night, I plugged it into my laptop. The footage was grainy, but it was clear enough. There was Lisa, alone with Chris in the gym. He wasn't just helping her stretch this time. They were sitting close on a bench, talking quietly, and then Chris leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't just a hug, but it was enough. Enough to shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Enough to confirm my worst fears. After seeing the hug on the security footage, everything clicked into place. The long nights, the extra sessions, the secrecy, it wasn't just in my head. Lisa and Chris had crossed the line. But as I continued watching them, I realized that this wasn't some grand, passionate affair. What they had was awkward, clumsy, and, honestly, cringeworthy. It was strange how obvious Chris's attempts at romance were once I started paying closer attention. He wasn't some smooth charmer. He was a guy trying way too hard to impress someone who should have known better. He flirted with Lisa in the most uncomfortable ways, and watching them together made me cringe every time. One day, Tom sent me a video of them during a training session. Chris was complimenting Lisa's muscles again, something about how amazing her form looked when she did a particular exercise. He sounded like he was trying to be seductive, but instead, he just came across as a complete not normal. "Your arms look so strong when you do those curls," he said in this over-the-top, exaggerated voice. Lisa blushed and giggled like a schoolgirl, clearly flattered, but to anyone watching, it was painfully awkward. Even her friends at the gym noticed how cringy it was. Hannah had told me how they would watch Chris make these ridiculous compliments in front of everyone, like he thought he was being charming. "The way he talks to her, it's embarrassing," Hannah had said. "It's like he's trying to impress her, but he has no idea how awkward it looks." But the awkwardness didn't stop there. Their private sessions became even more laughable as they tried to take their relationship outside the gym. Chris, always eager to impress, started making romantic gestures that just fell flat. One evening, Tom sent me a video of Chris meeting Lisa after her workout, standing by her car with a single rose in his hand. He looked so proud of himself, like he was pulling off some grand romantic move, but Lisa's expression told a different story. She looked more embarrassed than charmed, glancing around nervously to see if anyone was watching. She took the rose, smiled weakly, and they shared a quick hug. It was the most awkward embrace I had ever seen. They didn't know whether to linger or pull away, so they sort of stood there, unsure of what to do next. It was painful to watch, really, and I couldn't help but wonder how Lisa, who was usually so composed and confident, had fallen into something so juvenile. As time went on, their romance only got worse. Chris would try to show off in front of Lisa, trying to be the tough, cool guy. He'd do extra push-ups or lift heavier weights when she was watching, but it was obvious to everyone that he was trying way too hard. He wasn't impressing anyone, least of all me. Lisa, for her part, seemed to be caught in some kind of spell too deep to back out, but too embarrassed to fully embrace it. One time, Chris had the brilliant idea to take Lisa on a romantic walk after one of their sessions. They met up in the gym's parking lot, and he led her to a nearby park. I only knew about it because Tom, ever the loyal friend, caught it on the security cameras outside the gym. Chris tried to hold Lisa's hand as they walked, but she pulled it away after a few seconds, glancing around like she was scared someone might see them. It didn't take long for their awkward romance to become the talk of the gym. People started noticing how uncomfortable it all looked, the stolen glances, the weird conversations, the way Chris would hover too close to Lisa during their workouts. Her friends stopped asking questions and started rolling their eyes whenever they saw them together. The final straw came during one of their private sessions, where Chris decided to help Lisa with her stretches. It was supposed to be a normal stretch, but Chris turned it into some kind of awkward, intimate hold, placing his hands on her waist again, guiding her into a stretch that didn't look necessary at all. Tom managed to get another video of the whole thing, and I nearly laughed out loud when I watched it. Chris leaned in, whispering something in Lisa's ear as he held her waist, and for a moment, they just stood there in this weird, cringe-inducing embrace. Lisa looked uncomfortable, her face flushed not with passion, but with what I could only describe as secondhand embarrassment. It was like she knew how ridiculous the whole thing was, but didn't know how to stop it. Watching the videos, it became clear that this wasn't some steamy affair filled with passion and excitement. It was a clumsy, awkward mess of a relationship between two people who had no idea what they were doing. Chris was desperately trying to be charming, but he came off as a guy who had watched one too many romance movies and thought he could pull off the same moves. And Lisa, for whatever reason, had allowed herself to be pulled into it, despite how awkward and embarrassing it all was. By this point, I wasn't even sure what I felt anymore. Anger? Disappointment? Maybe a little of both. But mostly, I just felt like I was watching a bad romantic comedy unfold before my eyes, with Lisa and Chris playing the lead roles in a story that had no happy ending. It was hard to take their relationship seriously when everything they did looked so cringeworthy. And yet, the damage had been done. No matter how ridiculous their romance seemed, it didn't change the fact that Lisa had betrayed me. Even if it wasn't the passionate affair I'd feared, it was still a betrayal. The only question now was, how was I going to confront her about it? I had seen enough. The cringeworthy flirting, the awkward embraces, the stolen moments, it was all more than I could take. I couldn't let it go any longer. It was time for a confrontation. Lisa had been slipping away from me, caught up in her ridiculous fling with Chris, and I wasn't about to let them continue whatever charade they thought they were pulling. I decided to confront them at the source, the gym. I knew from Tom's schedule when they'd be having one of their private sessions, so I made my move. That evening, I waited in the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared myself for what was to come. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it, but I knew I couldn't stand idly by any longer. When I finally saw them through the gym's large windows, I knew it was time. There they were, alone in the weight area, laughing at something Chris had said. It was all so casual, like they didn't have a care in the world. It infuriated me. My wife, with this man, acting like nothing was wrong, like I didn't exist. I pushed the door open and walked inside. The gym was mostly empty at this time of night, which was perfect. No one to intervene. No one to witness the scene I was about to create. As I approached them, Chris was once again too close to Lisa, his hand resting casually on her shoulder as they went over some workout routine. "Enjoying your private training?" I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. They both froze, their heads snapping up to look at me. Lisa's face turned pale, and Chris stepped back immediately, his confident smile vanishing as he realized what was happening. "Babe, what are you doing here?" Lisa stammered, clearly caught off guard. "I should be asking you that," I replied, my voice steady but laced with anger. "What exactly is going on here, Lisa?" Chris opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't even try," I said, glaring at him. "I've seen enough." Lisa's eyes darted between Chris and me, panic creeping into her expression. She knew I wasn't just bluffing. She knew I had been watching. "It's not what you think," she started, her voice shaking. "We're just—" "Don't," I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "I've seen the videos, Lisa. I've seen the way he touches you, the way you let him. I've seen the way you laugh at his pathetic flirting. Don't insult me by pretending this is just about fitness." Chris stood there, looking like a deer caught in the headlights, as if he didn't know what to do with himself. I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't expecting this. He thought he could get away with his little game, But now he was standing face to face with the consequences. I don't know what you think you're doing, I said, turning to Chris, my voice sharp. But you've crossed the line. You think you're some kind of smooth player, don't you? Flirting with my wife, pretending it's just training. It's pathetic, Chris stammered, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Lisa, on the other hand, was on the verge of tears. It was a mistake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at her, my heart heavy with a mix of anger and hurt. A mistake? I repeated, incredulous. You think this is just a mistake? This has been going on for weeks, Lisa. Weeks of you sneaking around, letting this idiot flirt with you, touching you. And you expect me to believe it was just a mistake? Lisa wiped at her eyes, but the guilt was written all over her face. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. Chris, still standing there like a fool, tried to speak up again. Look, man, I didn't mean any harm. It's just... Shut up, I snapped, glaring at him. You think you're innocent in all this? You knew she was married, and you didn't care. You kept pushing, kept flirting, thinking you could get away with it. Chris stepped back, looking like he wanted to disappear. I could see the fear in his eyes now. He knew there was no way to charm his way out of this situation. Get out of here, I said, pointing toward the door. I don't ever want to see your face again. He didn't argue. He just grabbed his bag and bolted, leaving Lisa and me standing there in the middle of the gym. The silence was deafening as I turned back to her. Lisa looked broken, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. We need to talk, I said quietly, my anger simmering down to something more painful. But not here. She nodded, barely able to speak, and we both left the gym together. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. We drove home in silence. The tension between us was unbearable, thick like fog hanging in the air. Lisa sat beside me, her head turned toward the window, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. I could tell she was trying to hold herself together, but her tears kept falling silently. I didn't say a word. I wasn't sure I had anything left to say at this point. By the time we reached the house, the reality of the situation had started to settle in. The confrontation at the gym had been explosive, but now came the part one was dreading facing the truth. There would be no more hiding behind excuses, no more pretending that this was just about fitness. Tonight, Lisa was going to tell me everything. As we entered the house, I tossed my keys on the table and headed straight to the living room. I didn't even look at her as I sat down on the couch, my body still tense with anger and betrayal. She followed slowly, hesitating at the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Sit, I said, my voice calmer than I felt inside. She sat down on the edge of the couch, avoiding my gaze. For a few long moments, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. Finally, I broke the silence. Start talking, Lisa, I said, my voice low but firm. Tell me everything. I want to know how long this has been going on, and I want the truth this time. Lisa wiped at her tears, taking a shaky breath before she finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. I waited, my patience hanging by a thread. It started out innocent, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris, he was just my trainer at first. He was friendly, encouraging, and I liked the way he pushed me. But then he started flirting, and at first, I thought it was harmless. I didn't take it seriously. But you did, I said coldly. You took it seriously enough to let him kiss you. You took it seriously enough to spend hours alone with him. So don't tell me it was just harmless flirting. Lisa flinched at my words, the guilt etched clearly on her face. I know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I didn't stop it when I should have. I didn't set boundaries. I let him get too close and then they just escalated. Escalated how? I asked, my chest tightening. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer, but I needed to know. She hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears again. We started spending more time together. It wasn't just at the gym anymore. We'd grab coffee after training, and sometimes we talk for hours. I felt, I don't know, flattered. He made me feel special, like he was paying attention to me in a way that— Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she was trying to say. In a way that I hadn't. The realization hit me hard. It wasn't just about Chris. It was about something deeper, something that had been missing between us. Did you ever think about me? I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. Did you think about what this would do to me? To us? She nodded, fresh tears falling down her face. I did. I knew it was wrong, and I felt guilty. But I told myself it wasn't serious, that it wasn't an affair. It was just attention. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. You're telling me it wasn't an affair? Lisa, you let another man kiss you. You spent hours with him behind my back. That's not just attention. That's betrayal. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The truth was laid bare between us, and there was no denying it now. Did it ever go further than that? I asked, my voice barely steady. Did you sleep with him? Lisa's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. No, she cried, shaking her head vigorously. I swear, it never went that far. We kissed a few times, but that was it. I promise you, I never did that. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this mess hadn't gone that far, but trust had been shattered, and I wasn't sure if her words meant anything to me anymore. Why, Lisa? I asked, my voice quieter now. Why did you do it? What was it about him? She looked down at her hands, wiping her tears again. I don't know, she whispered. It wasn't just about Chris. I think I was just lonely. You've been so distant lately, and I felt like I was invisible to you. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling, so I let myself get swept up in something that made me feel noticed. Her words stung, not because they were an excuse, but because deep down, I knew there was some truth to them. I had been distant. Work, stress, life. It had all taken its toll on me, and maybe I hadn't noticed Lisa slipping away. But that didn't excuse what she had done. I'm sorry, she sobbed, her voice cracking. I never wanted to hurt you. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it. I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of emotions: anger, hurt, sadness. The betrayal had been revealed, and there was no taking it back. Everything was out in the open now, and the weight of it hung over us like a dark cloud. You can't just fix this, I said, my voice heavy. It's not that simple. Lisa nodded, her face etched with regret. I know, she whispered. I know it's not. We sat there in silence, the reality of what had happened sinking in. The betrayal was real, and now we had to figure out if there was anything left to salvage. In the days following the confrontation, I tried to make sense of everything. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a deep wound. Lisa's apologies were constant, but they felt hollow. No matter how many times she said she was sorry, the betrayal echoed in my mind. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her. The trust we had built over years had crumbled in a matter of weeks. Each day, I felt more distant from her, and I could tell she felt it too. We tried to act normal, doing the usual routines, eating dinner together, but there was no denying the huge chasm that had opened between us. Everything felt forced, and no amount of effort could bring back what was lost. But beyond the sadness, there was something else brewing inside me: anger. No, it was more than anger, it was the desire for revenge. Chris had come into our lives, wrecked everything, and thought he could just walk away. Lisa's betrayal stung, but his smug presence in this mess was like salt in the wound. He had toyed with my wife, manipulated her for his ego, and I couldn't let him get away with that. I wanted him to pay. And then there was Lisa's friend, Kelly. She had been training with Lisa at the gym this whole time, and unlike the others, she hadn't whispered rumors behind our backs. In fact, Kelly had tried to warn Lisa about how she was getting too close to Chris, but Lisa had ignored her. Kelly was attractive, confident, and she always had an eye on me, though she'd never crossed any lines. Until now, the opportunity for revenge practically fell into my lap. One evening, Lisa and I were going through the motions of another silent dinner when Kelly texted me, asking if I wanted to meet for a drink. She said she knew about everything, that she was sorry for what had happened, and that if I needed someone to talk to, she was there. It was innocent enough on the surface, but something in the way she worded it made me pause. There was an underlying invitation, a subtle offer that I could easily accept or ignore. I didn't even hesitate. I texted back, "Sure, let's meet up," and that was that. That night, after telling Lisa I needed some time to clear my head, I met Kelly at a quiet bar a few miles from our house. The moment I saw her, I could feel the tension between us, an unspoken understanding of why we were both there. She was dressed more provocatively than usual, and the way she smiled at me told me she knew exactly what she was doing. We ordered drinks and made small talk at first, but it didn't take long for the conversation to shift. "I've always thought you deserved better," Kelly said, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "You've been a good husband to Lisa, and she's lucky to have you. It's just, well, she lost her way." Her words dripped with sympathy, and for the first time in weeks, I felt seen, like someone understood my side of the story. Kelly leaned in closer, her hand brushing against mine. "You don't deserve this, you know. What she did, it wasn't fair to you." Her touch lingered, and I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: desire. Maybe it was the frustration of everything I'd been through, but in that moment, all I wanted was to take back some control, to get my own form of justice. The night escalated quickly after that. The anger and pain I'd been holding in for so long finally had an outlet. The truth is, it wasn't about Kelly, it was about revenge. It was about making Lisa feel what I had felt, even if she didn't know it yet. As wrong as it was, being with Kelly gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about love or attraction, it was about reclaiming my dignity, about proving to myself that I wasn't just some victim. If Lisa could betray me with her pathetic fling, then I could do the same, and with someone who was more than willing. The next morning, I woke up in Kelly's bed, the reality of what I had done sinking in. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel regret. If anything, I felt a twisted sense of triumph. I had taken back control, if only for a night. When I got home, Lisa was waiting for me. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Out," I replied simply, not offering any more explanation than that. Lisa studied me for a moment, sensing that something had shifted, but she didn't press. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she was too scared to ask the question that hung between us. Over the next few days, I kept my secret, and Lisa kept hers. But the truth was, neither of us could ignore the widening gulf between us. We were living in the same house, but we were worlds apart. The betrayal had poisoned everything, and now, even though I had taken my revenge, it hadn't solved anything. I thought hurting her the way she had hurt me would make things better, that it would somehow balance the scales. But all it did was solidify the end. The truth was, our marriage had been unraveling long before Chris came into the picture. Lisa had betrayed me, and I had betrayed her right back. We were even now, but we were also broken. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us, I finally spoke the words that had been lingering in the back of my mind for weeks. "I don't think we can come back from this." Lisa looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness, but also a kind of acceptance. "I don't think so either," she whispered. We both knew it was over. There were no more apologies left, no more excuses to make. The betrayal had destroyed what we once had, and now, there was nothing left but the wreckage. I had taken my revenge, but instead of satisfaction, I was left with emptiness. It was time to walk away.